So, when we first got our hands on an important scientific instrument known as the coffee refractometer, which some of you may possess, or you might work in places that have one of these devices, and they're about half the price of a good grinder, so it's a significant commitment to make. But when this device came onto the market about 5 years ago, we discovered we were really badly under-extracting our coffee, and we didn't know why. And we felt bad about it. So we spent a lot of time obsessing about our water chemistry and buying expensive water filters and tasting coffee with different waters, and made some conclusions and invested a lot of money and sweat, but still didn't have a good, reliable answer. So we'll leave water over here. And then we investigated our grinder, and we had read books by preeminent coffee educators, people like Scott Rao, whose books we still keep and sell and read, and he tells us about grind distribution. So when you slice up a coffee bean, you get particles that are different sizes. You think about when you're chopping up a piece of wood and you're getting sawdust with every chop. So perhaps the more chops you make, the more sawdust you get. And we were finding explanations like this for why we might be under-extracting our coffee. So it could be the grinder. Maybe our blades were too blunt. Maybe they were too sharp. Suddenly someone suggested, we need to season our burrs. Or they need to be covered in titanium. Or they need to be bigger. If you have a tiny little home grinder, maybe you're doing lots and lots and lots and lots of chops, so you're getting more sawdust. And maybe that was the reason. And then we looked at our tamper, and we noticed it was a bit wobbly. So we tried ones that were kind of curvy, ones that had sides slipped down at the bottom. And we started using naked porter filters. You've probably seen those, the one with the bottom chopped off. And we realized maybe some tampers were better than others, or maybe sometimes the water slipped down the side. We understood, because it was obvious to us, we could see it. This was a landmark that it was just water coming out the side, or it was a loss of pressure. So we started investigating pressure, and we started having higher pressure and lower pressure, and going back in time for the old lever shots, looking at pressure profiling like pre-infusion, and then shaped pressure using geared pumps and all that. And that kind of helped as well. But still, we didn't get an absolutely conclusive answer on why the coffee was under-extracting so badly, because it still was. Even long after the Strata project was on the market and understood, we still under-extracted our coffee. And the whole time we had a growing demand for coffee flavour. So the chain stores, particularly in the UK, were embracing these stronger, more aromatic, more flavoursome drinks called the flat white. You guys probably sell them in Czech. Though, to your credit, you do have a good and sensible tradition of single shots. You've never, to my eyes, you've never quite gone as crazy as we do in the UK with lots and lots of coffee, stuffing it into the porter filters. And while that was happening, flavor intensity was happening. We were aware that you could make single and double shots, and we wanted to make triple shots and have real flavor and real acidity, and it's kind of like in the American style beers that people appreciate. More hops, more aroma. Well, I'd say that does work, but we also gradually came to understand maybe we were using too much coffee. Now, that's no surprise to anyone that if you have a giant pile of coffee and only a small amount of water, you'll under-extract. We knew that 5 years ago. That was the first thing we worked out. So that's not the message I'm here to tell you. 5 years ago, everyone was quite clever, and doses started dropping down. So we were onto it. And water started going up. And lots of research was happening into water. And every year or so, everyone's coffee got a little bit lower dosed and a little bit more watery. And still we were under-extracting. Even still. And even when we tried to make coffee like Illy might recommend, the famous Italian roaster, we might take 7 grams of coffee and put it in a single basket, and we might double the amount of water, or even triple the amount of water, but Illy would probably be an advocate of double the water to coffee as your brew ratio. So even still we under-extracted. And then finally, we came up with an explanation. And the explanation was the one thing we'd never done. At Prufrock, we'd never roasted coffee. So there was a big gap in our knowledge. And there was a culture which we'd inherited from our very early days, working at Monmouth Coffee, which was maybe a European, a very early exponent of good quality second wave, early third wave, direct trade, good roasting practices, not burning the coffee. And we'd always felt a little bit on the back foot where it came to roasting, because we knew it was this big, scary thing like a car motor, with things moving up and down and smoke coming out. And people that did that, people that were baristas, and there was a sort of chasm between. And then some famous baristas would start roasters like Square Mile and James Hoffman, very good example of a barista that sort of stepped over, stopped really doing much baristaing and focused on roasting and learnt to cup, travelled the world, learnt about origin. So that was the trajectory. You were either a drink maker or you were a roaster, or maybe if you got bored of making drinks, you went and fixed machines or sold machines, or you became a trainer. So there was all these careers taking path. And the baristas just felt like cocktail guys, Maybe if you're a cocktail guy, you start to understand how you make vodka or bourbon or whiskey. Maybe you even visit a distillery, but you're not responsible for that product. We just felt like we were the mixologists, the ones that were responsible for flavor in the cup. And that was okay, because most people were happy. But we weren't happy, because we felt stupid. So, this year, we don't feel stupid anymore, for the first time. And I'm going to tell you why. Any questions so far? End of part 1. Okay, so part 2. Probably the thing that really started to give us the answers was roasters making us feel that we didn't do much cup tasting. They made it. They were critical of us that we would have strong opinions on coffee, but we didn't really understand the raw materials. So that was a fair criticism, and the beginning of our empowerment as baristas was learning to cup. Now everyone says that, go cup. We all go to cuppings and we drink and drink and drink, and we say, yeah, we can identify a Kenyan and an Ethiopian, and it tastes floral and it tastes like red currant. You might take it one step further and you get the L'Année de Café and you learn all your, which I recommend, and you learn these aroma kits and you get better at identifying aromas. My esteemed colleague here takes himself off to do a perfume course and has become an aficionado of aroma, and that's just the kind of thing baristas, Ben's the owner of the Espresso room, another exact contemporary of mine with similar gripes. Am I fair to say? Very similar gripes. Ben's the best example I can think of someone that wanted a dialogue with his roaster and had strong opinions, didn't mind sharing them, and had a lot of experience, but was also not a roaster, and maybe wasn't included. So we weren't included in the dialogue. So we started cupping like Q graders cup. And we have great respect for the Q grader qualification because it has credibility. It's hard to pass. Lots of really good coffee people fail the exams and keep striving, and we're all kind of impressed by this qualification because it is worthy and well structured, well organised. But we didn't want to pay 2,000 quid to get some training. Maybe we should do that, but we also knew that we weren't in a hurry going to start direct trading with Origin because we still like making espressos and pour-overs and cappuccinos. That's our focus. That's our unique skill set, is drinks makers. We just wanted empowerment and to begin a dialogue. So all we did, really, was go to the App Store and download a free cupping app, which you can do right now. Let me show you what it looks like. This phone's good for cupping. You can see all your numbers. Have a look. You can't do this on an old Nokia. Cupping Lab. Cup now. And then suddenly we see this very convenient wheel and a bunch of numbers. See that? Pass it around. Have a look. And you get a bit of a sense for how it works. And the more you do it, the more confident you feel, the faster you get, the less you spit the coffee out onto your phone. And make sure they laugh after I said that, because I've done that. And you start cupping in a very structured way. And then you even take all your drink making skills and you start to identify a few holes in some of the existing protocols for cupping. So one thing baristas do know and do understand is getting on the right grind, weighing out the coffee, not just throwing it in the coffee and what comes out the bottom. Most good baristas understand that we can weigh doses now and it's not just a sort of 2 clicks on the grinder scenario. So back 5 years ago, that was becoming commonplace. Every cafe I've been to in the Czech Republic is doing that. And it's commendable. So a precise ratio of coffee and water was necessary to use this scientific instrument I talked about. But if you read the SCAA cupping protocols, which you should, because they teach you what is meant by aftertaste, how we define acidity, what's meant by body, why the score adds up to 100 when you do the green grading system. Why is it 100 point? Why do we use the term 90 plus? You know, and all that's very, very quickly established. You see, I go into my body score. I can give it a 10 if it's life-changing. I can give it a 6 if it's on the cusp of commodity grade and I don't like it. And it doesn't really matter if I've done the Q grader course or not. It doesn't really matter if I understand the expected resultant flavour of Castillo variety coffee compared with Bourbon or Caturra or anything. That doesn't matter. I'll pick that up along the way. Because I'm a bit more organised. I could have 6 Caturras on the table and 1 Bourbon. And I could start seeing if I prefer the Bourbon, if I score it higher. We gradually got a little bit better at drinking our coffee in a structured way. But there was still a problem. We had barista technique, and we had cupping skills, and we had refractometry. Does everyone know what I mean by refractometry? You know, using that little bricks reader. So we had that, and the only thing that was missing was putting them all together. So we didn't just go 55 grams per litre, chuck the beans in the grinder, they come out the other end, pour the water up to the top of the cup, because that, let me tell you, not until the beginning of this year, and I've been a barista for 14 years, I never even twigged until halfway through 214 that our 200 ml cups didn't actually fit 200 mils of water when there's coffee in them. So mine perhaps is maybe not the most suited mind for chemistry and maths and putting these things together. But once I used my barista skill and I weighed the coffee and I weighed the water into the cup, I saw it hit 180 before it started overflowing. So we can't have that overflowing. And I noticed it took me about 30 seconds to fill the cup. So then I could move it. I could get my next cup, 10.0 grams of coffee, fill it up to the top, 180, bang on. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at putting the right amount of water and the right amount of coffee. And maybe in my cupping app, I wanted to test 4 coffees, because I find it dead confusing if I'm going to do 8 coffees, or it's too much. So then I've got a precise amount of water sitting there. So I take my very, I'd use some received wisdom. I look at the way people are brewing V60s or how they're making siphons, and I realize, okay, they want to control how much they stir the coffee. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I stir the whole cup, but in a very structured way that I can repeat. And I'm mixing in the bottom layer and the top layer. Meanwhile, I've got my timer going. And I take a reading. I syringe out some coffee here, and I syringe out some coffee here, 30 seconds later. 30 seconds later, syringe out some coffee here, and here. And what's in my cup? Well, this is the beginning of real empowerment for me. I take my readings. I know I put the same amount of coffee. I put the same amount of water. I stirred it the same. It sat there for the same amount of time. So in this cup, on the bottom, maybe it's double shot. And here, maybe it's a has-been. And maybe this is a square mile in there. This might be the barn in there. So all these coffees, it doesn't matter if they're from different origins. It would matter to a Q grader. It doesn't matter to me. They've all undergone the same conditions, on the same grind, same temperature, same time, same stirs, take my readings, got my numbers. Now, I think everyone that has used this device understands the implications. One coffee might be stronger than the other one. Now, one of them might taste disgusting. One of them might taste amazing. But I've taken my barista skills, my refractometry knowledge, and my new cupping skills, and I put them all together. And what I'm now empowered to make a judgment on is, which do I prefer? I record it. And even if not everyone in the whole of the Czech Republic will agree with me, I'm making an informed decision about which one of these I want on my brew bar at the moment. So that's the beginnings. That's day one. I select the locally Czech roasted double shot as the best option. Because I gave it the highest score, and it got the highest reading. Well, does that matter? Should it get the highest reading? What if it was grown 400 meters with shitloads of pesticides in Brazil, burst into life, was really dark roasted, and it would easily get the highest reading? Well, then I wouldn't have given it the highest score. Or what if it had the highest score by a million miles, but it wasn't the highest number? Well, that doesn't matter. It could be in the zone of strength that I need. So, this is kind of end of part 2. Anyone have any questions so far? Ben.
Excuse me, when you are talking about the reading, do you mean the TDS reading, so the solubility? Okay.
Do you treat blends similarly?
Yep, more about blends in part 3. And yes, so this same test applies to espresso blends. It applies to anything that is coffee. And a high number doesn't mean good, but it means well developed. So I don't know if you've seen some of those pie charts about what's in coffee, what's in roasted coffee, and it's really nice to see that. So you see something like 8% sucrose, 2% ash, 16% fat, maybe 10% organic acids, and then a whole bunch of cellulose that we can't dissolve, and fiber and protein and stuff. You follow? So you know that there's this things that you can dissolve, and if you've looked at your refractometer over time, you'll know that you get a kind of reading, a kind of extraction yield that works for you, and you know what under extraction means because it's when the reading hasn't gone high enough. And you associate sourness with under extraction, or wateriness, maybe. And you also know that over extraction might taste woody or bitter. You've got that sense. Anyone can do that. You put a shot in an espresso machine, you turn it on, you start tasting it. First bit's really sour, so it's strong and under extracted. Obviously, there's only a tiny, tiny bit come out at that point. You keep tasting it. Maybe it's okay balance. Doesn't mean good extraction, but what this test identifies, as more and more and more coffee solid erodes out and organic acids melt and sugar melts, and you wash aromatics, aromatic gases dissolve into the liquid, and you suddenly taste bitterness and woodiness, and maybe your mouth gets dry, and that's over extraction. So I think all the coffee shops and all the workflows and all the brewing methods, from what I've seen in the Czech Republic, demonstrate to me that people understand that difference. So the next step is making the right choice of coffee for your espressos. So step 1 and step 2 are what led us to what we do before we dial in. So we're also aware that we should probably try and put the grinder on the right grind. It shouldn't piss out in 5 seconds. It shouldn't take 10 minutes to get an espresso. And we also understand maybe a sweeter espresso is what we like, or we like really high body, or we want to make sure there's absolutely no astringency. We want a smooth espresso. So we have taste preferences that help us make our grind adjustment. So now part 3 is about how do you know it's the right one for your house espresso? And how can you use cupping to tell you that? So then you've got to think about your company's flavour preferences. So Prufrock has a clear, unequivocal dislike of roastiness as a company. And there's no reason roastiness is bad. It's fine, but it's not for us. And if it's a question of kind of coffee fashion, and we are aware that we think of a Nordic style of roasting, and I would say they are sort of pioneers of lighter roast. But how do we know that the lighter roast was successful? Because we're probably also aware that someone could drop the beans out of the roaster too soon. So we can identify in cupping roastiness. It tastes like smoke or pepper. Look on the flavour wheel. It's dry distillation. It's like toast, but burnt toast. You following? So if Prufrock as a company doesn't like roastiness, I can cup red brick espresso blend, or I can cup Lavazza or anything, as long as I've followed the same protocols on the same grind with the same water, and I take my readings, and in my cupping score, I make a note. Didn't like the roastiness. I'll score it down. I should score it down, because I'm not being a Q grader. I'm suddenly a barista doing a test roast assessment. I'm allowed to. They don't try and stop me, even though maybe I'm not qualified. But I write my score down. I make a deduction because I don't like the roastiness of it. And even if it has my highest solubility, if it had the best development, still not the one for me. So I strike that off my list. It's not coming onto the bar because it didn't get enough points, even if it was going to be easy to use. Then, and this is probably the most unexpected result, because we don't just cup, take readings, weigh things out. We also write them down. So another thing I could show you in my phone is the world's longest Google spreadsheet, going back months, with coffee samples that we've got from Double Shot and coffee samples we've got from the barn, and all our favourite roasters, and we're writing all these numbers down and all these scores. And sometimes you strike gold. You give a really high score and you get really strong coffee. So what that means, really high score is a really good thing. If you're giving 90 points for a coffee, that's a really good thing. If you're giving 90 points and a low number, that's a really interesting thing, but it's unusual. So we also saw a correlation between higher extraction yields, stronger cupping bowls, and high scores. Not guaranteed, but definitely a correlation that's identifiable. So what happens if the coffee's baked? Who knows what baked means? Because I'll tell you, to my surprise, that there was also almost, I haven't done enough of this to know 100% to make conclusions or talk about extraction targets. I feel like I've only just begun in this empowerment as a cupper and a roast assessor. But I have a strong sense that I could, not that I ever have, but I could start a roastery with this system. All I would need is a bunch of beans, the roaster, stick it in, fiddle around with the gas, fiddle around in a few different ways, cup, and then I give my highest score, then I take my reading in that very structured way, and whichever one's got the highest score and the highest reading, boom. That's got to be my most successful development, because it's easier for me because I personally try to avoid the roasty flavour. A company that wants that roasty flavour will identify on the flavour wheel what they want, and that will affect their score. So this should be a universal system you can apply. But sometimes coffees that were sent to us for samples said espresso roast, and they tasted roasty, but they didn't get high numbers very often. Or they tasted roasty, and they got pretty high numbers, and they were quite nice. A little bit roasty, little deduction, pretty high numbers. But a filter coffee grown at 2,000 meters in Kenya, washed, processed, super light roasted, might have even higher numbers. And we'd always been told, super high density coffee, it's hard to roast, evenly, it's really difficult. It'll probably take longer to extract, grind finer. You get the idea. So some big surprises happened that sort of altitude and bean density didn't seem to have a direct correlation between higher numbers. So let me explain what is meant by baking your coffee, because I would say this is a global pandemic in roasters of baking coffee. If you try to bake a loaf of bread and you've got your oven temperature wrong, you might get the nice crust and the inside is raw. So when that happens with coffee, who knows how these guys do it? But if it happens, the outside of the bean and the grinds that are coming from this portion must surely taste roasty. And the inside, well, maybe that tastes like vegetables or something. But there's definitely, it's very hard to extract green coffee for, I don't know, grind up some green coffee and see how sweet it is, what the TDS reading is. Maybe it's really high. But I'm assuming roasted coffee extracts better because in roasting, the beans crack. So that must mean they get bigger. We read in books that they double in size, or they might double in size. And if you bake the coffee, they don't really get bigger. So I'm assuming, not that I really know this, that the best roastings probably made the bean equally bigger everywhere. I don't even know if that's possible. But I'm guessing that must be what's happening. And you're getting little cell ruptures opening up each little part of the bean so the water can get in and dissolve the sugar and the organic acids. Does that sound like a reasonable assumption? What do you think? Or if you've ever taken a bean and you've tried to squash it and you can't break it open, maybe that's a good thing. It could be high altitude, high density, strictly hard bean from Guatemala, and it might end up cupping brilliantly and tasting good. Maybe that could be a barometer. If I notice the really hard ones that I can't crack in my hypothetical roastery also get very low solubility, maybe that's a new barometer, and I've got a little bit of proof for it. So selecting the coffee for our espresso bar has become easy because all we have to do, cup the coffee, look for high solubility, pick the ones that have high on both sides, then make some espressos from them. And if they taste shockingly sour, imbalanced and astringent, we can find another culprit But once we've started doing that, we've also identified that under extraction is less of a problem. And every time we get a nice high score and quite a low solubility reading, we always under extract here. Do you see? So I might have a bit of a guess. I might have a super bright Kenya AA, and I'm cupping it and thinking this is an incredible whack of fruity acidity. I might not try making an espresso out of that. I might have a go. It could be wasteful. I don't want to just throw out reams and reams of coffee. So I can make informed decisions. But here's the final issue we've discovered. And this is kind of where I'll leave off, is when we're worried about consistency in our brewing, we've also noticed some inconsistency in roasting batches. So even if a roaster works out profiles, spends a lot of time cupping, they're not always nailing the same high score and the same equal solubility from one batch to the next. So we've developed a protocol for our baristas. We noticed our baristas that would come in and start, 2 baristas would come in and start dialing in at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'd open at 8. And we noticed that was pretty much time for granola, making a couple of flat whites, and wasn't the most productive time of day. So we also identified an opportunity to get our baristas more empowerment and learn a cupping protocol that they can apply as their careers progress, if some of them want to become coffee traders or Q graders. They have these cupping skills. We have a large inventory of all our favourite roasters, and we can look back even perhaps at last year and roasting success from one of our suppliers. We can see what happens when their roaster goes on holidays. We can see what happens when they start getting beans from Nordic Approach, or or if they buy a farm in Colombia. We have some insight into how well they're roasting that coffee. And we can have a dialogue with them. If we have terrible extraction problems and we're getting terribly low TDS readings, we don't have to blame the water. We don't have to blame the tamper. We don't have to think it's channeling. If we know that we just put new grinder blades in our grinder and we've seasoned it with 10 kilos of coffee and we're doing the same thing we always did, we don't have to think it's excessive fines production or knotting of grinds or a problem with the grind morphology. We can think, hold on, maybe it's not our fault. We start a dialogue. Can we talk to you about this profile? Because we think it's roasty, and we're giving it pretty high scores, but the solubility's not quite there. We see real potential. How about lightening it up? How about... we can't say, why don't you go to 420 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 390 or whatever they do. But we can say, we don't think this was a success, and the profile from 2 weeks ago we thought was a wonderful success. If we breach our protocol, we're stuck. If we put 11 grams and 170 in water and we forget to take the reading until half an hour, we're stuck. But great brewing technique is evident in every cafe I've visited in Prague. I see methodical stirring, use of timers, adjusting grinds, rinsing papers, remembering after you've rinsed the paper to pour the water out. So we are responsible baristas that can be trusted to take TDS readings and give cupping scores, even if we're not qualified, because we're experienced So all we need to be, the only tools we need in readiness for our roastery we might open, or the Q-grader career we might have ahead of us, is taking all our great barista skills and all our knowledge of refractometry, which we've used with Espresso, and writing it all down. Good? Any questions?